You think you know Texas, the sprawling cities, the open ranch land, the oil fields stretching to the horizon. But beneath all of that, buried under decades of dust and silence, there are towns, real towns, towns that once had schools, saloons, post offices, and churches full of people who believed they were building something permanent. They weren't. Today we're counting down 13 ghost towns in Texas that history nearly swallowed whole. Some were boom towns that burned bright and fast. Others were simply left behind when the world moved on without them. And the one we're saving for last, it had everything going for it. Everything, and it still disappeared. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We find the forgotten corners of America that most people never think to look for. Let's get into it. Number 13, Indianola. Before Galveston, before Houston, there was Indianola. Hard to believe now, but this small stretch of the Gulf Coast was once the second largest port in Texas. In the 1850s and the 1860s, Indianola was the gateway to the state. German immigrants poured through it by the thousands. Camels, yes camels, were unloaded on its docks as part of the United States Army's famous experiment to use them as desert pack animals. At its peak, the town held around 5,000 people and was a serious contender to become Texas's dominant commercial hub. Then the Gulf came for it. A hurricane in 1875 flooded the town and killed hundreds. Indianola rebuilt. Residents patched the damage, restored the wharves, and convinced themselves the worst was behind them. 11 years later, in 1886, a second, more powerful storm made landfall directly over the town. The surge was catastrophic. Buildings that had survived the first storm were obliterated. Fires broke out in the wreckage. This time, there was no rebuilding. The remaining residents packed what little they had and left for good. Today, Indianola barely registers on the map. A historical marker stands near the old town site, a statue of René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, the French explorer who landed near here in the 1680s, watches over an empty shoreline. At low tide, you can sometimes see remnants of old foundations beneath the water, a city beneath the waves, gone, but not completely erased. There is a brick smokestack standing alone in a field off Interstate 20, west of Fort Worth. Most drivers pass it without a second glance, but that smokestack is all that is left of a town that once held 10,000 people, the largest city between Fort Worth and El Paso. Thurber was coal country. The Texas and Pacific Coal Company sank shafts into the ground here in the 1880s and built an entire civilization around what came out of them. Company-owned houses, company-owned stores, a company-owned hotel, even a company-owned opera house. It was a genuine company town in the most complete sense. The company controlled everything. Remarkably, Thurber was also one of the first fully unionized towns in Texas, and for a time, relations between workers and management were actually stable enough to sustain a thriving community. Then oil happened. Railroads switched from coal to petroleum in the 1920s. Almost overnight, the mines became worthless. By then, the Texas Pacific Coal and Oil Company had pivoted to oil. They made a decision that was breathtaking in its efficiency and its ruthlessness. They sold every building in Thurber for scrap and salvage. Brick by brick, board by board, the town was disassembled and hauled away. By 1933, Thurber had essentially ceased to exist. That smokestack, they could not figure out how to take it down cheaply, so they left it. It stands as a monument to 10,000 lives alone in a Texas field. Out in Culberson County, in the high desert between Van Horn and El Paso, there is a settlement called Lobo that never quite decided if it was alive or dead. At its peak, in the early 20th century, it served as a railroad, water stop, and small ranching community. The kind of place where a few hundred people made a quiet, dusty life. The railroad eventually stopped needing water stops. Diesel engines replaced steam. With that single technological shift, Lobo's entire reason to exist evaporated. What makes Lobo interesting today is not its history. It is what someone tried to do with its ghost. In the 1990s, a New York art dealer purchased much of the town site with visions of turning it into an avant-garde artist colony, inspired by the success of Marfa just down the road. It never materialized. The buildings continued to crumble. The desert continued to reclaim the land. You can still visit Lobo today. The old general store still stands, though barely. The silence out there is the kind that has weight to it. The silence of a place that has been waiting a long time for something that is not coming. Number 10, Poolville. In Parker County, about 30 miles west of Fort Worth, Poolville once had genuine ambitions. Founded in the 1870s, it grew into a real community with a cotton gin, mills, stores, and a solid school system. At its height, it held several hundred residents and was a legitimate local economic center. The railroad came to Parker County. It just did not come to Poolville. When the tracks were laid a few miles away through Weatherford, instead, commerce followed the iron rails as it always did. Slowly and steadily, businesses relocated toward the railroad towns. Families followed the jobs. The population drained away over decades rather than years. Not a dramatic collapse, but a long, quiet exhale. A small community still technically exists at the Poolville location today, but it is a fraction of what it once was. The old buildings are mostly gone. What remains is a name on a map and a few locals who remember what their grandparents told them about when things were busier here. Before Amarillo existed, the de facto capital of the Texas Panhandle was a rough, windswept settlement on the Canadian River called Tascosa, founded in the 1870s as a trading post and supply point for the enormous ranching operations spreading across the Panhandle. Tascosa grew fast and wild. Billy the Kid reportedly passed through. Pat Garrett, the lawman who eventually shot Billy, was a regular presence. Boot Hill Cemetery filled up with men who had settled their arguments the hard way. At its peak, Tascosa had saloons, stores, a newspaper, the Tascosa Pioneer, and the unmistakable energy of a place that believed it was going to be something significant. The railroad disagreed. When the Rock Island Line was laid through the region, it bypassed Tascosa completely in favor of a new town site that would become Amarillo. The decision was fatal. Businesses relocated practically overnight. By 1915, the post office closed. Tascosa was finished. Today, the site is home to Cal Farley's Boys Ranch, a youth facility that has occupied the land since 1939. Boot Hill still exists on the property, with a handful of weathered grave markers standing. Occasionally, visitors are allowed to pay their respects to Tascosa's dead, who outlasted the town itself. Number 8, Desdemona. The name itself feels like a prophecy. Desdemona in Eastland County was an oil boom town of the most explosive variety. When petroleum was discovered here in 1918, the population exploded from a few hundred to somewhere around 15,000 people in under 2 years. 15,000. In the middle of nowhere, Central Texas, 10 cities spread across the surrounding hills. Hotels rented beds in 8-hour shifts because there were not enough rooms for everyone who came. The oil field was called the Hog Creek Field, and for a brief, frantic window, it seemed like it might produce indefinitely. It did not. Production peaked fast and fell faster. By the early 1920s, the easy oil was gone, and so were the people who came to extract it. The tents came down. The temporary hotels emptied. The population collapsed back to the hundreds. Desdemona still exists today, just barely. A few hundred people call it home. The old downtown has a handful of surviving structures that hint at the brief, chaotic glory days. It is a town that burned at 10,000 degrees for a moment, then cooled to almost nothing. Named for a Shakespearean tragedy, lived like one too. Number 7, Terlingua. Okay, if you've spent time in the Big Bend region, you've heard of Terlingua. You might have even visited. But what most people who attend the famous chili cook-off there every November don't realize is that the Terlingua they're partying in is a genuine ghost town that never fully died. The original Terlingua was a mercury mining settlement. Cinnabar ore was extracted from the Chisos Mountains starting in the 1880s. and by the early 20th century, the Chisos Mining Company had turned this remote desert into a full operation with several hundred workers, a company store, and adobe housing. Mercury, used in everything from thermometers to explosives, made this desolate corner of Texas surprisingly valuable. When World War II ended and mercury prices collapsed, the mines shut down. The workers left. The company store closed its doors. By 1946, Terlingua was empty. Then the outsiders found it. Starting in the 1960s and accelerating through the decades since, artists, drifters, and desert lovers began trickling back into the ruins. They did not rebuild exactly. They inhabited. Today, Terlingua exists in this strange, half-alive state, crumbling adobe walls beside occupied homes, a ghost town gift shop next to actual ruins, a cemetery that is still actively used. It is one of the most genuinely strange communities in America, a ghost town that decided it was not finished. Number 6, Indianola. Just kidding. Number 6, Sheridan. If you are enjoying this journey through Forgotten Texas, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find content like this, and we have some genuinely remarkable places still to come. Sheridan, in Colorado County between Houston and San Antonio, had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, twice. Founded in the years before the Civil War, Sheridan grew into a modest but prosperous cotton trading community. The courthouse was here. The county offices were here. It was, for all practical purposes, a county seat with real permanence ahead of it. Then the railroad came and went somewhere else. When the tracks were laid through Columbus instead of Sheridan, the economic logic shifted immediately. The county seat was relocated. Businesses followed. Sheridan spent the following decades in slow decline, the buildings emptying one by one as the people who needed them moved toward the railroad. Today there is almost nothing left to indicate Sheridan was ever a place of consequence. A historical marker sits near where the town center once stood. The land has largely returned to agriculture. It is another courthouse town swallowed by the inexorable math of rail geography. Just outside San Antonio, close enough to see the city's glow at night, there is a place on older maps called Newtown in Bayard County. The story of why it disappeared is not about railroads, and not about oil, and not about natural disasters. The reason is segregation. Newtown was a thriving African American community established after the Civil War, one of many freedmen's towns that sprang up across Texas as formerly enslaved people built independent lives. At its peak, it had businesses, churches, a school, and a genuine sense of community, self-determination. It was exactly what its residents had every right to build. But proximity to a major city made it vulnerable. As San Antonio expanded through the 20th century, Newtown, like so many black communities near American cities in this era, was absorbed, displaced, and effectively erased through development pressure, discriminatory policy, and deliberate neglect of infrastructure. The physical community is gone, but the history of what was built there and what was taken is preserved by descendants and local historians who refuse to let it be completely forgotten. Some ghost towns are abandoned, some are destroyed. The distinction matters enormously. Number 4, Peyton Colony. Similar in spirit to Newtown, Peyton Colony in Blanco County represents one of the most successful and tragic examples of community building in Texas after the Civil War. Established around 1865 by freedmen who acquired land through sheer determination and economic hustle, Peyton Colony at its peak encompassed thousands of acres owned by black families, an extraordinary achievement in the Reconstruction era. The community had farms, a school, churches, and social structures that sustained multiple generations. But land is only as secure as the legal and social systems that protect ownership. Over decades, through a combination of economic hardship, outmigration as younger generations sought opportunity in cities, and pressures that ranged from subtle to explicit, the community gradually dissolved. By the mid-20th century, Peyton Colony had largely ceased to function as a community. Some descendants still own land in the area. The history is documented and studied, but the living community The thing that generations of families built from nothing is gone. These are the ghost towns that history books spend the least time on and probably should spend the most. Number 3, Dump. Yes, that is the actual name. In the remote stretch of the Davis Mountains in Jeff Davis County, there was a community called Dump, named, without apparent irony, for a nearby ore dump from mining operations. Dump was a small settlement that served the ranching and mining activity in the area during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It had a post office, which is how we know it was real. The U.S. Postal Service is meticulous about documenting the communities it served, and Dump, Texas, had mail service for several decades before the post office finally closed and the settlement faded away. Almost nothing remains. The Davis Mountains are beautiful and wild, and nature has done a thorough job of reclaiming whatever Dump left behind. But somewhere out in that high desert, someone once had a mailing address that read Dump, Texas, and that feels worth remembering. Number 2, Mentone. We need to talk about Mentone. Mentone is the county seat of Loving County, the least populous county in the entire United States. In recent census counts, Loving County has registered fewer than 100 residents, sometimes fewer than 60. In 2020, the county recorded 64 people. The county seat, Mentone, has at various times had a population in the single digits, and yet it persists. Founded in the 1880s and tied to the ranching economy of the Permian Basin, Mentone has technically existed as a functioning county seat for well over a century. It has a courthouse. It has elected officials. It holds county commission meetings. It is, by every legal definition, a real government entity, governing a county with fewer residents than most apartment buildings. The oil boom that transformed the surrounding Permian Basin largely bypassed Mentone itself, enriching the county's tax base without populating it. Workers live elsewhere and commute. The courthouse stands as a kind of constitutional curiosity, the smallest county government in America, still operating, still holding elections, still sending its tiny population's needs to Austin. Is Mentone a ghost town? Not technically. Is it one of the strangest inhabited places in the United States? Without question. Drive out there and you'll understand what it means for a place to exist at the absolute outer edge of viability. Number 1, St. Mary's of Aransas. We saved this one for last because it is, in every way, the most complete tragedy on this list. St. Mary's of Aransas sat on the Texas Gulf Coast at the mouth of Copano Bay in what is now Aransas County. In the years immediately following its founding in 1857, it was positioned to become one of the most important cities in the entire state of Texas. This is not hyperbole. The town's founders and serious investors and developers who put real money into it genuinely believed St. Mary's of Aransas would become the commercial capital of South Texas. The geography was perfect. Deep harbor access, proximity to the rich ranching lands of the interior, a natural position to capture trade flowing in and out of the region. The town platted ambitious streets and blocks. A hotel went up. Merchants arrived. A newspaper began publishing. The population surged toward 2,000 people, which in 1860, Texas made this a genuinely significant city. The Civil War arrived and disrupted everything, as it disrupted everything along the Texas coast. Union naval forces blockaded the Gulf ports. Commerce collapsed. The town survived the war, barely, and began trying to rebuild. Then came the railroads, and St. Mary's made the mistake of fighting them. When the Corpus Christi, San Diego, and Rio Grande Railroad was being planned through the region, St. Mary's leaders attempted to negotiate terms that the railroad refused. It was a negotiating position that seemed reasonable at the time. The railroad simply went elsewhere, to Rockport, just a few miles away, which welcomed it with open arms. Everything that should have been St. Mary's went to Rockport instead. The commerce, the growth, the investment. Rockport boomed. St. Mary's began to empty. The final blow came in August 1919. The Corpus Christi hurricane of 1919 was one of the most powerful storms to strike the Texas coast in the 20th century. The surge it pushed across Capano Bay was catastrophic. St. Mary's, already struggling with a fraction of its former population, was hit directly. Buildings were destroyed. The few remaining residents had nothing to return to. They did not return. Today, St. Mary's of Aransas is completely gone. Not partially gone, completely. There is no town site to visit, no ruins to photograph, no foundations visible at low tide. The land itself has largely subsided and been reclaimed by the bay. A town that came within a single railroad negotiation of becoming a major Texas city has been so thoroughly erased that most Texans have never heard its name. That's the thing about forgotten places. They don't fade gradually. They reach a point where the last person who remembered them personally is gone. And after that, without deliberate effort, they simply cease to exist in human memory. St. Mary's of Aransas existed. It had streets and buildings and people with plans. It almost mattered enormously. Instead, it is a name on an old land grant and a historical marker in Rockport that most people drive past without stopping. Texas is full of places like this, not famous enough to be on the tourist maps, not dramatic enough to make the history books, just real places where real people lived, now gone. We think they are worth remembering. If you do too, hit that subscribe button. We find these places so they do not disappear completely. Drop a comment below if you have visited any of these sites or if there is a forgotten Texas town we missed. There are always more.